Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Chennai Chess Olympiad 2022. It's round number 5, which means it's around the halfway point of the tournament because there are 11 rounds. And now there are a few teams remaining and a few players remaining who have perfect scores. Also, if you've enjoyed the format, if you've enjoyed the content, all courses 33% off. Support the content, use code Olympiad. You know the drill. Now, I'm going to show you 11 games like I did yesterday in about 30 minutes. We will start with Magnus. Norway is struggling, but they're taking on Zambia this round. And last round, they took on Mongolia. They were the rating favorite, but they almost lost the match. In today's match, Magnus is on board 1 against Gilan Bwalia. Magnus plays a Queen's Gambit declined Rogozin. White plays this E3, A3 system. I've played this in Blitz actually quite a bit. But I generally play it without having put my knight on f3. I usually play bishop d3 and knight e2. That's another way of playing this position. Bwalia plays bishop d3. We have a trade, queen c7, and white plays knight d2. Knight d2 is not, it's not a mistake. It's just one of the plans, I suppose, of the position. You can also drop your bishop back and then try to expand on the queen side with a4, rook b1, c4. You have to castle at some point as well. White chooses to play knight d2, and a couple moves later plays f4, so kind of getting a spiky stonewall structure, preventing black from playing the move a5. Maybe in the future you're going to get your knight to e5, but Magnus is not just going to sit there and let you do what you want. He's going to play knight d5 right away, and white already has a pretty difficult decision considering both of these pawns are now under attack. The best move here for white is to play knight e4. That move defends c3 and defends e3, and then after something like c takes d4, there's c d4, knight d4, with the queen hitting the bishop. If you play queen d4, then there's knight b6 hitting the bishop and hitting the queen, which means instead of playing queen d4, you have to play bishop d5, and after e takes d5, you have to sack your knight and then play queen takes d4. Now, somewhere in that sequence of moves, for some reason, white did not play knight e4. Probably... I mean, maybe, I don't know. He didn't go for knight e4. He played bishop takes d5, and this just gives Magnus the opening of his bishop, and now white is stuck playing behind kind of a ruin of a structure because white has 6 pawns out of 7 on dark squares and a dark squared bishop. You really kind of needed to avoid this, and Magnus just sort of, watch what he does. He brings his light squared bishop to the middle of the board, plays f6, violates the rules of Ben Feingold so the enemy knight couldn't get in, and then all he has to do is get the right exchange of pieces, and he's just going to be in great shape. And it's just bishop versus knight here, and white just doesn't have a lot of pawn mobility. The knight on the edge of the board is kind of stuck, and white has some very clear targets, like the second rank, these pawns, and Magnus just goes for it. I mean, he grabs one pawn, he kind of neuters the attack here on the g7 pawn by attacking white's king and rook first. And beautiful little finishing here sequence of not taking on c1, but taking here first. Back rank mate if you go this way, and king f1, bishop d3 is mate in the game. Now, I mean, Magnus just makes it look easy sometimes. And this is a really good player with white. This is a 2400 rated player, but I mean, yeah, So Magnus is 3.5 out of 4 and has gained 0.7 points. Norway won this match. They won either 3.5 half. I think they won 3.5 half. Against Zambia. We'll see if they can continue to make a run back to the top. Now, it's time to talk about the perfect scores. First, we're going to look at Spain versus India B, or India 2. Alexei Shirov plays a sideline Sicilian defense against Gukesh. But on board 3, Jaime Santos Latasa, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, played this also against Prague. So they actually took a very similar approach against Gukesh and Prague. Must have been very coordinated. Black has a big hole on d5, and white is going to try to just kind of bully the black position around that. You'll notice that Shirov is kind of setting up here. Now, at this point, things get weird. So Shirov can just castle. He can play h3, preventing bishop g4. There's a few things. He plays rook g1. Now, rook g1 is a crazy move because the idea of rook g1 is to play g4, g5. There's no going back. And that is exactly what Shirov does in a little bit. He plays g4. That is brave. I mean, that is... And then he plays g5, even though it's very clear Gukesh is running the king away. And Gukesh runs the king to the queen side. So now the king is totally safe. Position is in the balance. We're going to have a battle with no bishops and one horse each and heavy pieces, right? Shirov gets a little bit of a binded down on the queen side. And then Gukesh is like, wait a minute. I don't have to respect his play at all. I have b5. He thinks he's attacking me. Who's attacking who? All right? This is a generational clash. Shirov is not from the modern generation. I'm not even sure he's from the former one. He might be from 2 generations ago. Shirov was once number 2 in the world. Gukesh might be number 2 in the world in a few years. And he's like, all right, let's go. d4. We're blowing up the board. ed, queen b5. Knight e5, navigating, queen a6 check. Let's trade the queens. And now let's go into a position of just rooks and knights and 5 pawns each. Gukesh has a bind and a pass pawn and an active rook on the h-file. The knight drops back. Pawns clash in the center. And now we have a locked situation where both sides are claiming to have dominant knights. But whose knight is actually doing a bigger job for the benefits of their position? g7 might fall and the f-pawn might promote. Gukesh is not afraid. He's not afraid. Why? Because let's say after king b6, you play something like rook takes g7. Then after this, there's the amazing move d5. Whose knight is escorting the pawns better? d3, e3, e2. It's a race, right? And that's kind of what happens. Shirov tries to fight on the queen side, rook c4 and go for the a-pawn. One pawn falls, other pawn falls, and Shirov tries to attack with the h-pawn, but it's the black pawns in the middle of the board that are going to prove decisive. Even if you lose one, right? Right now, black is down a pawn, but that d-pawn is just running. And the players make it to the time control, and Gukesh has just defeated Alexei Shirov. That is nuts. He is 5 out of 5 with a performance rating of like 3,300, okay? India is one of 2 teams remaining, India B, one of 2 teams remaining on perfect scores. Jaime Santos Latasa defeated Prague on board 3, but on board 4, it was the Beast. The Beast, Ariban Bhaskaran defeating Iturizaga, the Grandmaster from Spain. So a match which featured 3 out of 4 decisive results, but India prevails. India B prevails. Amazing job by them. They are perfect. Their board 1 is a superstar. He is now the third, he's now the 3rd highest rated Indian player. He's higher rated than Vidit, and Vidit is on India Team A, which is wild. So amazing stuff by Gukesh. He's also ranked 27th in the world now. That's also incredible. The next game that I have for you is the matchup between Uzbekistan, which yesterday drew America, versus Slovakia. Jurgis Peshach is a very strong player. He represents board 1, but he plays the Kozio defense against the Rui Lopez, which is very brave. And I mean, UZBEK is like a 2,700 rated player, basically. You gotta know your stuff here if you're gonna be playing this. This is a very imbalanced way to play the Rui Lopez. Would highly recommend this for people looking to kind of play the Rui Lopez, but not learn all of the main lines. Now, around move 12, black had a great position. I mean, black's opening experiment worked very well. All right, now we have knight e2, rerouting the knight to f4, hitting the bishop. Bishop takes ab. The white rook on the a file is very powerful now, right? Knight c6, c3, controlling the dark squared bishop and the knight. a5, knight d5, and rook a4. This very fascinating configuration of pieces makes it very difficult for black to move because black doesn't have a lot of pawn mobility. UZBEK plays bishop f4, rook e8, and here plays a sort of counterintuitive move. He takes the knight. What? He takes the knight because he has an idea in the future to probably play f4 and maybe f5, like not right now, but just visually speaking, right? You do it too fast, your knight gets booted. But he tries to get this position to a situation where it'll be knight versus bishop and a better structure for white. And you kind of notice how white's position is really well equipped to deal with the enemy bishop. The bishop is just blocked completely. So white is ever so slightly better, and black tries to create a little queenside counterplay. The problem with the last 2 moves, queen b5, rook b8, is it's now plus 2.5 for white. Why? f4. It's not really clear what was overlooked. Just this very subtle exchange of d for b pawns ends the game. Completely ends the game. I'm not sure what black had overlooked, but by completely ruining the structure here and white just getting e5 and totally booting the bishop, this knight is a superstar. It's an untouchable piece. None of black's pieces can get to it. And the bishop is just worse. And Nodirbek also wins a completely effortless game. Uzbekistan now has 9 points out of 10. Uzbekistan beat Slovakia 4-0. Every board won. And now Nodirbek is also performing at 3300 level. It's nuts. It's completely insane. Gukesh and Nodirbek are both just rolling the opposition. Just completely smashing. Yeah, I mean, what to say? The next match that I have for you is the matchup between Armenia and England. A lot of you have told me to cover the games of England. They have been doing very well. They also are perfect, just like Armenia. We continue to have this problem where Wales, as well as England, just are listed as Abkhazia, which is some sort of region. I've asked chess.com why this happens many times, but at this point, it's sort of a running inside joke that if it's an English player or a Welsh player, they are going to have this flag, even though it says England. So that's cool. All right, here we go. D4. Now, every other game in this match was a draw. So whoever wins this game wins the match for their team, and their team stays perfect. We have a Queen's Indian by black, a very solid Queen's Indian where the knights get traded early. A5 tries to attack on the queen side. Light squared bishops get traded. And white plays h4. h4 is just useful. You never know if you need to use g5 or play h5, h6. And white creates this bind on black. You'll notice that McShane has a very solid position, but white is always better. White has a space advantage. The black knight on a6 is really sort of not doing a whole lot. It's up to white to figure out whether or not he's going to be able to break through. Finally, McShane takes and now plays b5, kicking out the queen, but now white has two center pawns and white has a target over here, which is why black begins kind of rerouting efforts, maybe queen f7 to fight back on the diagonal, right? e4. A4 to take some space, rook d2, h6, and queen f7. And black's just sort of like, I will never lose. I'm rock solid. I mean, I have no spatial weaknesses anymore. Good luck. So we have b4, which is an important move. If black does not play the move a b3 here, if black, for example, just random move king h8, this pawn becomes a backwards pawn. Look at how big the advantage grows. Rook c1, rook c2, and I'm just going to go for the c6 pawn. So black has to do this. Now McShane forces off the queens. de5, rook d2, bishop d2, and a big trade happens where black ends up down one pawn. Now, you might ask, why did McShane play e5 if in this position he's just going to be down material? Luke McShane might have calculated rook d2, for example, and maybe thought that after knight c5 he's getting sufficient counterplay on the e-pawn here. And, I mean, knight d2 is just kind of a stupid-looking move because you can just paralyze your knight and your rook all in one, so it just doesn't look like a smart decision. But bishop d2, and somehow, like, this pawn is hanging, but there's always counterplay now. This wouldn't have been the case if the rook had taken on d2, but somehow there's always counterplay on the king, the rook can go to e1 and defend, and Melkumian just hangs onto his pawn. Just hangs onto it, right? Trades off, knight d4, sending the game into an endgame. Black has connected pawns. White has a 4-on-2, though. White has the e, f, gh versus gh, and CB, rook b5, king e6, black is looking for this endgame. The 3-on-2 endgame, which just is a totally theoretical draw. Melkumian is not going to do that. He's not going to play into that endgame. Instead, he's going to defend all his pawns and use his pawns to push the enemy king back. And I'm talking all the way back. Okay? Then he plays rook back to b4 to prevent checks, and the king and the other pawns are going to keep moving. He has a massive majority. 3-on-1 is a decisive majority of pawns. And the way this game is going to be decided is the E and F pawns walk up together. The final block that will fall is this H pawn. That H pawn will sacrifice itself, and now white has E and F together. And those E and F pawns together will win white the game. The king will either walk between them, or you will play F6 and rook B8. And Melkumian wins a very nice game. And I'm sorry, I know we have a lot of viewers from England, and sometimes when I don't cover games of people, I want to cover them in the next recap video, but it's not always possible. It's sometimes like I want to cover in the next recap video, but Armenia beats England, and now I have to show a game where an English player lost. But England looking to bounce back. After 5 rounds, only 2 teams remain with perfect scores in the open section, which are Armenia and India B. And that probably means they will play against each other tomorrow. Let's keep moving along. The next match I have for you is Cuba versus Azerbaijan. This was also a very crazy match. There was decisive games. Mamedyarov won, board 4-1 for Cuba. So it's up to this matchup of board 2 or board 3 to determine who is going to win the match. Now we have a Sicilian defense. We have a Sveshnikov Sicilian defense. This has been surveyed in the World Championship match. And Albornoz Cabrera in this game got a super interesting position, a nice queenside bind, and Mamedov tried to fight back like this. This is all very thematic stuff. In this game, White did something really funny. White, instead of castling short, which is something that I have seen a million times, castled long, and basically made the claim that there was no attack, and that they were going to attack over here, right? Black tried to fight back. White rerouted to that b5 square and just created a little barrier. And the truth is, there is no attack. The only way to break down a king's position is with pawns or with pieces, and you can't do either here. So at this point, White plays h3, and White plays g4 and is like, I'm gonna attack you now. Remember just that other game, the Gukesh game? We have a similar situation here. The player from Cuba is like, I don't see the attack. Okay, you can try to trade off my knight. Let's do that. c4. You still have nothing. You can't play b5. You play b5, I just take. You have no attack. I'm going to go gf or here and just attack you. But Mamedov doesn't want to just sit around, so he actually does play b5. You got to do something, right? So White takes, and now he plays a4. He's just trying to shred open the position. Now, if White were to just absent-mindedly capture, after queen a5, queen b4, Black is just completely winning. So you got to be a little careful. Sometimes the best way to be careful is to be aggressive. b6. Attacking the queen, forcing it to move, and now the queen cannot get in. White closes the door. The b file is now permanently closed, and this a pawn might walk in. You'll blockade it too. You'll play king to a2. Good luck ever getting past me on the a file, right? So queen a6, rook c1, a3, king a2. It's just what I said. Rook b8. As long as this defense holds up, White is completely winning because remember we just talked about pawn majorities in that last game? This is a 4-on-1 pawn majority in the middle of the board. And that 4-on-1 pawn majority becomes an, look at this, unstoppable connected pass pawns. b7, Black resigns. Cuba has just upset Azerbaijan. They now have 9 points out of 10. They are 4.5 out of 5. They've won 4 matches and drawn 1. They are crushing it. It's amazing. Their average rating is something like 2580. It's incredible. I'm not sure Cuba has a single 2600 rated player on that team. So shout out to Cuba. Amazing stuff here, taking down Azerbaijan. And it was really just the threat of the incoming attack that forced Mamedov to try to create immediate counterplay. Look how quickly White just switched everything. No more attack on the king side. Let me deal with this aggression. Deals with it perfectly, gets all the pieces over, and just wins the game. Amazing stuff. Gonna keep an eye on this Cuban team as we keep covering this event. There was a very interesting matchup between the United States and Israel because 3 of the games ended in draws as well. So it comes down to this one: can the former Cuban player Dominguez Perez defeat Maxim Radstein? This one was a long anti-Berlin. We saw this opening surveyed a lot in the candidates tournament. We're not gonna feature all of the intricacies of the opening. We are going to get to a position where there's kind of a clear game plan. As you can see, White has some light squared complex to work with and begins an expansion on that side of the board. We have c4, and we have Black trying to prevent White from ever getting c5, which would be unpleasant. So given that these pieces are sort of clustered, Lenier plays this very interesting knight h4 to try to get something going over here while the Black pieces are stuck. All right, he gets the bishop over there, forces Black into an exchange, but Radstein is doing a nice job. This knight is really annoying, for example. Rook e3, rook c3, constant pressure, and this move is begging to be played now, but it's a little bit too early to sacrifice an exchange for no reason, although I feel like the engine would do it. The engine would just be like, you break Black's structure forever, rook c1, and I really feel like rook c5 is just the way to go. I actually feel like in my heart of hearts, it's the best move. Lenier, for that very reason, does exactly that with a little bit more preparation. So he sacrifices material. White now has a very clear plan of action, but black begins fighting back. Rook f6, knight d7, sacrificing more material. As you can see, the f-file is ready to be shredded open, but he's too fast. Dominguez Perez is just restricting the movement of black's pieces and wins the entire queenside. Now, black does get into f2 for the sacrifice of an entire knight, and it looks like there's mate. But you can go to h2. There is no mate. And then you cover on the g2 square. And after the players made the time control, it was just a matter of technique. As white hides his king, covers his king, there's just nothing. There's nothing there. And his pawns are just going to go, right? Black tries, wins one of them, but it's just too much. Too much activity. And that d pawn is going to be the difference maker as it makes it all the way down to the board, to the end of the board. And white in style here. You know what white should make here, of course, is a knight. That's actually what should have happened, but unfortunately Rudstein resigns after knight f4. US defeats Israel, and US is also on 9 points out of 10. Very convincing win. Seems like a lot of different players from the US contribute on different days, so big things happening over there. Now, the matchup between Iran and Turkey. We haven't featured either of these teams. They're both doing very well, and this was also a very close match that was decided ultimately by a couple of games. Now, this one was just a traditional Spanish. Okay, so this was like a Morphy. I think this is known as the Martinez variation, like bishop d7. Yeah, a lot of maneuvering here. We are not covering crazy intricacies, but as you can see, Wahab Sanal went aggressive against Puya Idani here with g4, h5 ideas, and white struck in the middle. When you see that your opponent is going to attack you on the side of the board, you got to strike back in the center, and well, that's, I mean, black's position looks incredible, right? I mean, the knight is super powerful, but it's not so clear, you know? And if you fall asleep at the wheel, g3 comes. And white offers you this pawn with check, but the knight is permanently stuck. So instead of that, black goes back. And it's like, if you've been aggressive the entire game, and now suddenly you have all these pawns on dark squares, this light squared complex is juicy. That bishop might never participate in the game again. And how fast Puya Idani turned this around. Look at this. Queen h5, knight g4, knight takes f6. Beautiful tactic. It looks like the king is safe, but knight f5. Queen g7 is a threat. Knight e7 is a threat. And if you take the knight, there's no way to prevent f6 discovered check. And it all falls apart. The bishop never participated in the game again. Not only did the bishop never participate, it was the reason black got mated. So I guess what had to happen all the way back here was when black did all of this, black didn't have to hesitate. I guess black had to kind of continue attacking with b4. Black sort of slowed down here and as white was preparing a counterattack, yeah, like like right here, I guess, you know, after d5 already, there's some problems. Maybe black should have played h5, h4, but black hesitated. And how quickly it all went in the complete opposite direction, leading to mate. And Iran wins. Iran also with 9 points out of 10, fielding a massive team. They have like Parham, Tabatabai, so curious to see how they will do. Let's pop on over to the women's side. There are 3 teams remaining with perfect score on the women's side. 2 of the teams competing for that spot, Romania and Poland. Here we have Michaela Sandu, don't know where I put the accent, versus Monika Sochko. The Sochko family is a powerhouse family. They have Monika, they have Bartosz, so very very strong family over there. E4, E5, knight F3, knight F6, and a Petrov defense. We have this line with D4, D5. Also, we've seen this in the candidates. Now, DC, I think, is a sideline because I'm pretty sure black normally plays some C6 stuff, but maybe in this particular move order, DC is the main line. I am not well-versed in my theoretical status, but white has an isolated pawn, and the player with the isolated pawn likes to get aggressive with their pieces, and you can kind of see that. White is being as aggressive as possible here, right? Rook e1, bishop g5, and a few moves later, white is also going to play rook a d1. Look at white's position. Every piece is playing. You very rarely see that. The bishop's on the side, the knight's in the middle, the rooks, queen is out on a comfortable position. it seems like a position where if black doesn't play carefully, black might lose. And white plays g4, and that seems to be, you know, an opportunity to get g5. Now, black here can immediately create counterplay, and apparently g4 was a bit too much. But black doesn't play that. Black actually goes back and tries to reinforce the bishop instead of getting aggressive, and that gives white a little bit of time and a couple more steps in the wrong direction. Allow this preparation leading up to a nice tactical shot. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes knight looks like one of the ugliest, dumbest moves you could ever play. Why would you trade this bishop for this garbage knight? It has no moves. The knight has no legal moves. Why would you ever take it, right? Wrong. White knows what she's doing. Any way that black takes, you have some sort of tactic. She sacrifices for knight d5 ideas, and then has the knight can come back to c4. I think after knight e8, what the engine wanted was this first, but again, Stockfish is the kid in the back of the class that tells the teacher that they haven't collected the homework yet. So, you know, we have knight d5, bishop e5, and a gorgeous move here. Bishop f6. Oh my. Oh my. Now with perfect play, it's defendable for black. With perfect play, gf6, but black plays queen a5. Doesn't take, doesn't repeat moves, and white's like, no, you must take my bishop. You didn't take it here, but you gotta take my bishop. Take my bishop. You got no choice. And after king g7, we have check, here, takes, knight f6 is on the way. And the lower rated player from Romania gets the job done, forcing a mate on the back rank, and Romania is perfect. 10 out of 10, taking down Poland, the chess powerhouse, amazing. And another game that I have for you is this one. Tanya Sajdev is like in every single recap. Now, the person playing with black has a Romanian name. Navrotescu, right? I guess Andria Navrotescu. But this is a French matchup. This is India versus France. And Tanya plays the semi-Slav with bishop g5. Black plays the Cambridge Springs defense. Tanya gets a position where black has the bishop pair, but a little bit less space. Black relies on counterplay with c5 and e5 in these structures. And it's up to Tanya to sort of prevent that, right? She plays b4, as you can see. She plays queen c2, rook d1. And black is sort of succeeding in the counterplay. White is succeeding in getting the 2-on-1 on the queen side. But now black has, obviously, some activity. Tanya plays rook c1, queen a4 attacking the pawn. And now tactics begin to fly. Knight d5, e d5, knight to a5 hitting the bishop, and knight goes to c6. So we have an opposite colored bishop situation where white is going to play bishop d7, and this is going to be like a fishbone for the black pieces. They're all going to choke on it. There's nothing you can do against the bishop and a pawn that deep into the territory. All you can do is try to create counterplay, and that's what black does. Black tries to play d4, but it's a little bit too late. All white has to do now is slowly go into your position. And that is exactly what she does. Tanya plays rook a7, a nice tactic here with rook b7 and rook c1. You can take the bishop, but then there's this, and then I queen and I win. So rook c1, bishop d6, and the final few moves of this game are savage. Rook c8, rook f8. Oh, you can't queen because there's this defense. This bishop? Yeah. Bishop e8. The shield, and now your rook is in jail. b8 is coming, and Tanya Sajdev wins again. She is 4.5 out of 5, and India is also perfect, along with Georgia in the women's section. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Maybe the Indian women's team will, I don't want to jinx anything, but they're currently rolling, and Tanya has been an anchor on that final board. Now, for the last two games of today's recap, I wanted to show you mini brilliancies. A lot of you requested me to cover Canada's games, particularly Eric Hansen. And the same thing happened with the English team. Is like, I want to cover their games, but all of a sudden he's playing Anish Giri. It's like, uh-oh. Now, Anish plays a Catalan, and Hansen did a nice job. He actually equalized from the opening, it felt like. He played a very kind of reliable setup here with a very powerful knight on d5. But Anish sacrificed a rook. Sacrificed in exchange for kind of a very solid structure for himself and a damaged structure for black, right? He's going to try to play e3, knight e5, win himself a couple of pawns, and win the game. Like, white has no weaknesses. Similar in the Lenier game, right? Sacrificing in exchange. He takes a6, he comes back, he doesn't give up the a pawn, right? And Hansen tries to fight back with his pawns. This is the best approach in my opinion. Like, you gotta fight back, otherwise white's just gonna win all your pawns, right? So Anish gets his 2 pawns. Here comes queen f6, here comes g4. Now, if white is not careful, there's all sorts of stuff on f2, right? But knight e4, hitting the queen, defending f2. Rook back to c2, defending f2. a3 pawn is still protected. Rook a7. We have rook d2, bishop e7. It's kind of a maneuvering battle now, right? Anish plays knight g3, inviting an exchange of queens. If you trade queens here for black, you've got to follow it up with the move bishop h4. And even that is very unpleasant, right? So there's queen g5, and what happens is after d5, Anish breaking apart the position, player's time is ticking lower and lower. This rook on a7 never got back into the game. Anish just traded in the center, centralized his pieces, and here's something really strange happened. Hansen played his 40th move and resigned. Just straight up resigned. Like, white didn't even move. He played his move, and the game ends. And it's like, why? And also, why is it +3? Well, just look around. This rook can't move. The rook is legitimately completely stuck. And after the move b5, that rook has 0 moves. It cannot take, go anywhere here or here. It could go to a5, but then you lose c7, and then you lose the game. After b5, black has 0 moves. Like, let's say black tries to do nothing, king a4. Let's say the king tries to go back to h8, right? Rook e3, rook e8. Some sort of checkmate is coming. Queen e4, rook g8, queen h7. I mean, black legitimately somehow ended up with no rook. That rook moved 1 time, maybe a few times, played like rook c8, rook a8, and then rook a7. That's it. Anish Giri plays an absolutely fascinating sacrifice and wins a beautiful positional game. Amazing positional game. And the last game that I wanted to show you today was a game between David Navarro from the Czech Republic. Czech Republic hasn't been featured yet. A Caro-Kann defense played by the Mongolian board 1, who had a rough couple of days. He had to play Navarra and Magnus. This line, queen g4, has been played a handful of times. And white builds up a kind of a blob of pieces pointing in that direction. Black tries to fight back with f6, f5, as you can see. This has all been played before, and as you can tell from the evaluation, black is doing quite well here according to the computer, especially if you kind of know how to defend the position. Knight on h8 is not the ugliest piece in the world. It will get back, don't worry. Even with all this, we have a trade. And knight c6. d4, queen d5. Black activating the queen. It would have been slightly better here to actually start bringing the knight back, or to get the knight to the b4 square. This seemed to be the right idea, to play queen e7, b5, knight b4. When you play it this way, the knight cannot get to b4. And sometimes these Caro-Kann positions are very tricky. If you play the incorrect way, suddenly you don't get your pieces back into the game as you once could. Look at this position. You know what the threat here is of queen g3, folks? It's to sack the queen, maybe. Like, there's a brewing threat here of queen takes g6. Like, or knight g5, queen takes. Like, there's all sorts of obscure threats where you're threatening to, you don't believe me, like, let's say bishop d7, check here, h7 here, check here, here, mate. The threat is queen g6. So black's like, oops, all right, I gotta go back. But the problem is that the attack continues. David Navarro continues to slaughter the black position. And by the end of this game, this queen went all over the board. It found a way in on the center line. It was trying to get in over here. It found a way in this way. And the game ends in style, okay? Checkmate in 3. Check this out. Boom! Queen takes h7, and black resigns because there is a mate with a pawn at the end. Good lord, David Navarro, take a bow. That's absolutely beautiful. And remember what I told you this knight was going to get out? Yeah, did not anticipate that happening. The craziest thing is this all went downhill when black played queen d5. He had maybe one more chance, but after queen e7 was the right way. David Navarro wins a nice game for the Czech Republic, who are 8 out of 10. Full standings, I always put a link in the description. Yeah, hope you enjoyed today's recap. I'll see you in the next one. Get out of here.